Please be aware, in this podcast series we talk about all areas of safeguarding, which some people may find upsetting. So please make sure you're okay listening to today's topic. Be mindful of those around you, such as children, that you might not want to listen in. Hi, I'm SSS Safeguarding Director Sam Preston.
And I'm former head teacher and content author Sara Spinks.
Today we are discussing Ofsted's proposed changes outlined in their current consultation as to how safeguarding is inspected in schools, nurseries and further education settings. At the time of this recording, the consultation is open, and so this is a crucial moment for school leaders, teachers and anyone involved in education to have their say. One of the most significant changes being proposed is the shift in how safeguarding is judged. Instead of a graded system, schools will now receive a straightforward met or not met safeguarding judgment.
I think at first glance this may seem like an oversimplification, but there's more to it. Ofsted has released detailed inspection toolkits for different education settings, outlining what inspectors will be looking for under 6 key safeguarding areas.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, Sarah. At first when I saw that and I thought, oh no, because I was seeing a sort of diluted focus and that I was a little bit worried about it. But you're right. And the fact that they've had to produce these toolkits tells you there's a lot in there. So I suppose today, let's unpack what each of these 6 areas, what that entails, and let's get to basics. What do schools need to do to ensure they meet the safeguarding requirements? So let's start with the first area, and that is safeguarding culture in schools.
Yeah, the safeguarding culture of a school, that's absolutely fundamental. And this is about ensuring that safeguarding is not just a policy written in a handbook, but it's sort of deeply embedded ethos that's lived and breathed by staff, pupils and school leaders.
Absolutely. I mean, it's an absolute must, isn't it? Now, Ofsted states that leaders and those responsible for governance, that they must create a culture where safeguarding is a shared responsibility. So every member of staff, from the head teacher to lunchtime supervisors, they need to understand their role in keeping children safe.
Yeah, and it's not just about staff understanding their responsibilities, it's also about how pupils feel. So schools must provide an environment where students feel safe, they're supported, and they feel confident that got any safeguarding concerns that they raise, they will be taken seriously.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. Often safeguarding failures aren't due to a lack of policy, but rather a failure to create that culture where those policies are understood and properly implemented.
Absolutely. Leaders, they must be open to scrutiny, willing to reflect on safeguarding practices and proactive in reviewing their policies. Safeguarding should never just be a tick box exercise. It requires that sort of constant vigilance and improvement.
Yeah, and I have to say, for many, many years, I worked with, I wouldn't even be able to guess how many schools, auditing their safeguarding practice. And yes, we would look at their policies, we would make sure they had all those things in place. We would create protocols which actually help make the policies more practical to implement. They were a great exercise. But it was about it was saying, right, your policy says this, that's great. So how are you doing that then? What happens?
So what, isn't it?
And it is. It's that conversation. You're not challenging, but you're just asking the question. So if this happened, how do you think you'd go about doing that? And that's the bit of work really that has to happen beyond having the policy in place.
Yeah, definitely.
So moving on to the second key area, it's safeguarding information for staff. So schools must ensure that all staff, governors and leaders have a thorough understanding of safeguarding responsibilities and legal requirements.
Yeah, and that includes being familiar with, the key statutory documents such as keeping children safe in education and working together to safeguard children.
And I'm just going to reflect on what I was previously saying. It's not just about knowing the documents. I mean, I always think it's a little bit of a misnomer saying, it's a mandatory requirement. All staff have to read up the relevant parts of KCSIE to their role. Well, actually, it doesn't really tell you an awful lot, does it? It just tells you they've read them. The understanding part of it is the practice. So staff need to be able to recognise, potential safeguarding issues, understanding the signs of abuse and neglect, but they need to feel confident, and they need to feel confident in following the correct reporting procedures.
Exactly. Ofsted want to see that safeguarding knowledge is not limited to just the designated safeguarding lead, the DSL, but it's widely understood across that whole school workforce.
Yeah. So that brings us in kind of quite nicely to the next key area, which is the management of safeguarding. So this area in the proposal is all about ensuring that school leaders and governors meet their statutory duties when it comes to safeguarding.
Yeah, and Ofsted, they'll be checking that schools are fully compliant with government guidance, including Part 2 of KCSIE. And this means having clear safeguarding policies in place and ensuring they're regularly reviewed and updated.
Another key aspect is compliance with the prevent duty, which is obviously under scrutiny at the time of this recording, which requires schools to identify and respond to risks of radicalisation. And I would just tag on to that signs of extremism. So staff must be trained to recognise signs of extremist grooming and understand the referral process if they have concerns. But I would just say, I would direct listeners to our previous podcast where we discussed whether if the prevent duty is fit for purpose, because we have quite a detailed conversation about the changing face of extremism and how that is not necessarily linked to any sort of fixed ideology. We're seeing a very, very different picture now. So if you haven't listened to that podcast, I'd strongly recommend you give that a listen, because it's very interesting about the current picture in the UK of extremism and risk of radicalisation.
Yeah, I think that's really worth listening to. Ofsted will also be looking at whether safeguarding concerns are effectively recorded and monitored. So schools need to have those robust procedures in place to track safeguarding issues, follow up on concerns and ensure appropriate support is provided to students at risk.
Right. The fourth area in the proposed changes is safer recruitment. I don't think that's any surprise to anybody else, that is still a key bit. So this is about ensuring that the people working in schools are suitable to work with children.
So Ofsted will expect schools to follow safer recruitment practices, which are outlined in Part 3 of KCSIE. And this includes conducting thorough background checks on staff, volunteers, and anyone else who has regular contact with pupils.
And that's not just about classroom teachers. Schools must also apply safer recruitment principles to areas such as alternative provision, which, don't forget, if the DSL from the original school, where they're still actually on roll out to alternative provision, has to have an oversee of safeguarding arrangements in the alternative provision, host families and private fostering arrangements.
And a key point Ofsted makes is that if minor safeguarding concerns are identified during an inspection, they must be dealt with immediately. So schools need to show that they are proactive in resolving issues and ensuring the highest standards of safeguarding.
Yeah, that's a really key point, actually. The fifth area is how schools handle safeguarding concerns or allegations. So this is a crucial aspect because poor handling of safeguarding concerns can lead to very serious consequences.
So schools, they must have that clear and well documented procedures in place for reporting and managing safeguarding concerns. So this includes ensuring staff understand when and how to make referrals and how concerns should be escalated when necessary.
Yeah, and Ofsted will be checking whether schools comply with Part 4 of KCSIE, which sets out how allegations against staff should be managed.
Yeah, and it's essential that all concerns are logged accurately and securely, and that the school follows a transparent and accountable process in dealing with allegations or safeguarding reports.
So the sixth and final area Ofsted will be inspecting is child-on-child sexual violence and harassment. And this has become an increasingly significant safeguarding issue in schools.
And Ofsted expects schools to have a clear and effective approach to addressing incidents of peer-on-peer abuse, or we now call it child-on-child abuse. And this means ensuring that all staff understand how to identify, report and respond to cases of sexual violence and harassment.
Yeah. So, crucially, schools must follow Part 5 of KCSIE. So that provides the statutory guidance on how to manage incidents of sexual violence and harassment between pupils.
And leaders, they've got to ensure that their approach is victim-centred, meaning that pupils who disclose abuse feel supported and protected. And schools also need to create an environment where such behaviour is not tolerated. That's zero tolerance approach. And those proactive steps are taken to educate pupils about respect and consent.
So, looking at these 6 areas, it's clear that the met or not met judgment is not as simple as it first appears. Schools will need to demonstrate that they have robust safeguarding measures in place across all these areas to receive the met rating.
Absolutely. This consultation is a vital opportunity for educators, school leaders and stakeholders to share their views on how safeguarding should be inspected.
Yeah, and if you work in education, listeners, now's the time to make your voice heard. You can review the draft inspection toolkits and submit feedback to Ofsted through their consultation website.
And for you listeners, you can find a link to the consultation in our article, Ofsted Consultation, Improving Inspection of Safeguarding, which can be accessed on the SSS Learning website.
Yeah, so please do have your say by completing the consultation and help frame the future of inspections.